Hello, everybody. We're once again live on X, Sado X Live, back with another show. And first and foremost, I would like to start by thanking everybody who commented in our poll. We're trying to figure out the best time with which to put on this show for you guys. And that's why we asked, like, whereabouts in the world you are, which time zone suits you best. So at the end of this show, we'll be picking a winner for 100,000 tokens. And that means that you still have time. You still have time till the end of the show to write a comment and write where you're from, and then that way you'll enter in the raffle. So stick around and yeah, let us know where you guys are from so we can better communicate with you guys.
We're also just interested.
Uh, Sorry.
We're also just interested. I mean, it's kind of cool to know where people are listening from and like where our audience is. So.
Yeah, one of the funniest message was like, "I'm somewhere in the world" or something like that. It's like I don't want you guys to know. I'm like, okay,
But
okay,
my IP address is
exactly.
thanks to it.
Yeah. Speaking of IP addresses, and we were planning to talk about Linux in France and how countries around the world are starting to understand that there is such a thing as digital sovereignty, and they are starting to look at their stack. And our core question was, first you change the OS, then you change the apps. Eventually, you'll have to change the network.
Mm-hmm.
And now we've got these latest development from Europe, where von der Leyen, the EU commissioner, came out and said something to the tune of nobody should tell parents how to. No platform should tell
Kids. Yeah.
parents how to raise your kids, and then they release a platform.
Yeah.
So, what do you make of that, Richard?
I mean, it's all the things, right? So you can, you can kind of read into what the problems are sometimes by the bullet points, talking about the virtues of something. Right. So, the first thing you see underneath that is like this, more secure than anything, da 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 da. And of course, those are the problems, right? First of all, millions of kids across Europe handing over personal data to a platform that is now a massive honeypot for anyone to hack because
They already
it's got
hacked
all this
it.
data. Okay, so like it's now an empty honeypot. Anyway,
Yeah.
so you've got all of that. The fact that like, will it actually work, etc. In terms of like how long these kids who want to get online, like they'll work their way around it. But and then of course just the logicality of it. So the double things, yes, like no one should tell you how to raise your kids, so we'll block them from the internet, and you can't do anything about it, even though you might well know that it's in their interest sometimes to be on certain things. And at the same time, the thing that really hits me, like where my heart is on this issue, is that there's a bunch of parents out there who are active in their kids' online lives and working with them, doing a great job. Good work, parents. So, like, I hope I'm one of them. That's like a good number of people. But this gives parents who aren't that this idea that their kids are now safe online because the EU is protecting them, right? And the parents who are on the edge of like bothering to actually have that chat with your kids, because it's tiring. You got to think about stuff, and nobody wants to think that no one wants to think their son is old enough to want to look at porn yet, right? But anyone knows when they think about it, like they're probably too late already, right? But it's an uncomfortable decision you don't want to have, and this gives you an excuse to think, oh, I don't need to do that, right? So it's actually undermining the urgency that parents will feel to actually engage and help their kids deal with this shit, because oh well, the EU's taking care of it for me, government's on it, right? I don't have to actually have that kind of nasty conversation, etc. Or even go and do the effort of learning actually what's out there, understanding what the apps that your kids are using are, and understanding what they're doing on them, right? So to me, that's really personally the biggest concern. Although all the other concerns, like the fact that you're having to put your personal data into a central storage place that's already been hacked, also bad. So generally, I mean, I've I'm known for being totally against this stuff, and this is just another. It's the EU doing a quality version of what Australia messed up in a amateur way. So, like,
Yeah. I think it's more of a question of the way they go about it,
yeah,
because there's problems, there's solutions, and then there's what they choose to do, which is never really a solution. It's
mm,
more of a compromise between what they want to do and what the digital actors want to do, like big tech.
hmm
And that kind of is like, okay, so you guys want all the data, we want all the control. How do we sell this to the masses?
right.
Oh, okay, yeah, it's we're
There's
protecting the
a
kids.
there's a great cartoon going around the Australian political press of a guy wearing a tie from the national broadcaster and the current prime minister, and they've got the prime minister's holding a box called restriction of speech or something,
Mm,
and the guy from the broadcast is asking him, so how do you want me to wrap this? And behind him are two rolls of wrapping paper, and one is save the kids, and the other is foil terrorism, right? And it's
yeah,
like which way do you want to wrap this up? And I think it's there are people involved in this who misguided them. They be their full and genuine intentions are to be helpful, right? But that's at the very good end of it, right? That's at the harmless end of it, but it's still ending up causing harm. And it goes all the way from there to people who have zero interest in actually, you know, helping, kids so much as they're just wanting to, yes, to be able to control and funnel. And I mean, the tech firms are certainly on that end. I mean, as is evidenced by the way that, they've been held up to partially to account, for designing their algorithms to be intentionally addictive specifically to kids. Um, they love this kind of thing because it makes people feel like the problem's gone away. And it gives them very clear boundaries on exactly what they can do, right? So they can go and do all of that stuff, right? It's the same as the example I always go to is truth in advertising, which I think really hurts people because you can't lie in an advertisement, but you can put someone in a lab coat and put a stethoscope on them, even though they're not a doctor, right? Now that's lying in some sense of the word because there are people out there who'll see that and think, oh, it's a doctor, or at least get the impression that it is, or be at least, pushed towards thinking that there's some kind of medical sense in which this information is coming, right? Now, if you just said, no, you can lie your face off in ads. You can tell people that this tobacco product is going to make you handsome and live for 400 years. If they can do that, then no one believes anything they say at all anyway, right? And so you're actually protecting people because you're helping them build up skepticism. You're not putting them in a position where they're actually kind of able to be manipulated by people who understand the rules better than they are. And I think that's exactly what this kind of protection software does. And then, like you say as well, it comes with this really weirdly condescending kind of overtone of like, we know what's good for you. There's a kind of real, and it's sort of done in a way that's almost frightening, to me anyway.
yeah, and it's. I think it's also the question of at what level do you set the rules? Because if the rules are coming from the highest level and they're like 20, 30, 40 layers of different use cases, different cultures, different situations, you can't really have a granular version of these rules that take into consideration all those different use cases and all those different needs. So you kind of
Yeah.
end up bunching a lot of people together. It's the equivalent of first through fourth grade in during the Industrial Revolution. It
Mm.
was set by age, not by talent or ability. So you kind of end up molding a whole group of people because that's the way is easy for you, and that's the
Mm.
way that you and your partner, big tech, agree to do it.
Mm.
And the problem that I see is that people want to talk about it. The Twitter's like filled from Professor Werner, Robert Werner, a great economist, to fight CBDCs and all these different Twitter or X pages that are, up in arms about it. But at the same time, they would like to have the same ease of use that you get on something like a Google or a Meta.
Mm.
And they don't understand that you're not on the internet. When you're on Google, you're not on the internet. You're on their
Mm.
network. And everything there is proprietary. Same with Meta. And if you want to be on the internet, well, it's a bit more like Mad Max. You kind of have to make your own stuff. It's a bit more like graphene. It's a bit more like Sado. And how
Yeah.
do we get that message out?
Well, I think it's. I mean, people have been saying that for a long time. So the example I was going to there with is the shopping mall, right? Like, there's long been a culture of people who love shopping malls and that environment and stuff, and there's long been a culture of people trying to point out that it's horrific, and it's a kind of walled garden where any kind of innovation, is mediated by profit taking, etc., all the way through. And I think, there's people for whom a little bit to a lot of messiness is a welcome homely feeling. They just like, there's a Chinese term jianghu, like rivers and lakes, right? Kind of tries to depict a landscape of kind of intrigue and messiness, and but also a lot of commerce and a lot of interactions and stuff, right? And that, to me, that I always love that, that sort of, whether you think of it as like the Viennese cafe scene or whatever, but there's like a lot of people to bump into, a lot of whom you'll disagree with or have arguments with, or whatever. But you rough and tumble get versus like, I want a curated set of experiences. I want McDonald's and then a Marvel movie, right? And I want to just know exactly what's going to happen, and then I get what I wanted, and then I go home, right? And so I think there's a tendency to it's the comfort, it's easy, and it's not like I've never watched a Marvel movie on a plane or whatever and enjoyed it, but I think it's that limiting factor. If that's all you can have, it starts getting kind of rough pretty quickly. And I think it's just understanding that if all that is left are these walled gardens, etc., then it gets harder and harder for the next whatever great thing it is that you're going to experience, whether it's an app experience or an artistic experience or whatever. There's so many things playing against that coming out, and you see that in a lot of markets, and it's sad because it just means your general experiences are much more lacking. But it's hard to convince people that you need to take a little bit of the rough with the smooth if you want to have a space where other people can come in and interject, etc., and make their own art or commercial things or whatever.
Yeah, it's hard to tell people that clunk is the point. That if everything is smooth, then it's not your path. If you want to go your own way, guess what? It's going to be a bit more rough terrain.
Well, I think it's also, and this is where the kind of enshittification side comes to it, right? So you look at something like the Apple ecosystem and the Apple experience. Now, I feel like I've been chained to the desk if I use Apple stuff, but then I'm a weirdo, right? It's clear that the Apple experience it delights a lot of people. They set out to build stuff that is a really enjoyable consumer experience, a really enjoyable creative experience. Like, a lot of great creative people who care endlessly about aesthetics and stuff really enjoy their Mac equipment and stuff like that. And so the tendency is to kind of think, well, what about new apps and stuff? Like, wouldn't Apple be the first ones? If they're so dedicated to people having a great experience, won't they be, isn't there kind of a market there that's going to make for this to be the place where you're going to get that first? You're going to get the new experience first. And what we've seen with enshittification is that's true for a while, right? That's true within parameters. But as soon as they've got their market and they've locked it in, then it starts to be the case where, like, if it's going to make less money for them, right? Or if the new cooler experience can't be turned into a subscription model, but the existing one can, then they're going to work hard to keep you away from that new thing, right? And I think there's versions of that with Apple, like with people are starting to use things like Krita and Blender, which are open source projects, and starting to realize, oh wait, these guys have some things here that I really like, and that we couldn't do that on a subscription model. I'm starting to actually, people starting to look sideways. I think Flow, that movie winning an animation Oscar, built purely on Blender, started to get people in the kind of Apple ecosystem, the Apple Adobe complex, creative complex, looking over the fence and saying, maybe we're not getting the best of everything. But it's that shitification thing where suddenly, if you get good enough, you can just sort of hold the market, and then it becomes a question not of, it's harder to make the new delightful thing. It's easier to try and squeeze every last cent out of the products you have, and you start having a lesser and lesser experience. And I think if you look at modern Linux distributions, Mac is polished, but it's old. It looks like Boomer software compared, right? Because it can't change and break out of that mode, and they can't allow for diversity. They can't allow people to put their own desktop on it. Yeah, Linux desktops break, and not all the apps follow the theming, so they don't look as cohesive and as beautiful all the time. Elementary does a pretty good job. But you can get, a crazy neon dragon themed desktop that looks astonishing if that's your thing, in a way that you just can't elsewhere. And I think that's, but it might break because, there's only 400,000 users and they make it, the 10 people who make it do it as a hobby. So it's not like, Cupertino's finest to like polishing every little burnished corner.
So I guess the price of diversity is the fact that maybe you have a bit less focus because there are different directions that people are going in and they're trying new things out and they want to have their own flair. And I think what I hear from what you told me is that there is some sort of price to pay to this comfortable situation that we've ended up in. And it reminds me of a Persian saying that goes along the lines to get choked by cotton.
Right.
Which means that you can have a very, very comfy life, but you sink further and further in the cotton. And then once you try to get out of it, you can't because you're at the bottom and there's like all over the place. And I feel like that's what's happening now in an accelerated pace because of things happening in the rest of the world. And I certainly hope that people are starting to wake up. And okay, on Twitter, we have a bias to complaining and, fight the power. But at the same time, we kind of have to, start the group, start our own Avengers, do our own thing and get people, instead of just complaining about stuff, how about come and try Sato out? Like I read this comment. I was trying to engage with a different account. And I was explaining the things that we do. And this guy with 0 followers and 0 posts wrote that, oh, this is a crap project. They have no partners. They have no nothing. They just talk about crap. And I thought to myself, I can hear what you're saying, but at the same time, what have you done to help? We are working on these problems. We're trying to fix them. This is, you're literally fighting a gazillion-dollar corporation or two, and the people have the same expectations. You know what? We kind of have to help each other because we're like the Rebel Alliance and we're fighting the Empire.
Yeah. No, it's really true. And I think, there's been a lot of hoo-ha in crypto, which has also clouded that.
The Star Destroyer looks amazing, but, it's still a Star Destroyer.
Well, exactly. The toilets are always clean. There's plenty of space. That Star's huge. No, it's true. And the uniforms are always clean and fresh and new. It's kind of true. I think people also forget with like projects like Bitcoin. It's because there's now Wall Street ETFs. People forget that like the Bitcoin software used to crash or mess up your machine and stuff like that. In the early days, it wasn't. It was people were actually filing bug reports on new versions of Windows and things about how it didn't work. And it was a community effort to get it moving. And similarly with Linux. Early days with Linux, you had to really want to play with computers to make it work. Where nowadays they put it on helicopters that fly around Mars, right? Like it's gotten that good because millions of people have used it, put time into improving it. But what it means is it still belongs to those people. and you can't acidify it, you can't break it, you can't do, even with these age restriction requirements, it's the legal way the software works. You could always eject them yourself if you wanted to, or you could always form a group of people who decide not to use them. And that's, if your government in California make you a criminal for that, that's an issue. But, just the way the software works, it's always possible to essentially take it in your garage, rip out the bits you don't want, and keep using it. And that's something that is possible because, people put all that work into doing it together and to improving it, to getting it to a state where it's useful, but it still belongs to the people that, built it, rather than, it's useful, we've now got an audience, now we can start the serification process and the enrichment process on the back end of it. So, yeah.
Exactly, and there's a lot of examples of Linux doing great work. But before we get into those examples, I just want to tell everybody that just joined us, don't forget to tell us where you're watching us from. We want to find the best time for this show. So we have a poll going on our X page. We would encourage you guys to go in there, vote, and then leave a comment. If you leave a comment, we're gonna have a raffle at the end of the show, and one person's gonna win 100,000 Satos. So
I always want to say meat tray. I don't know if you know this. The classic in Australia was for the pub to raffle off a tray of meat from the local butcher. This is about the most Australian thing I can think of. It's like winning lamb chops and being super happy about it, and some sausages.
Only a vegetarian would, not be happy with that price.
What's that? Says the man in the pub in 1973 Melbourne.
It's a guy from the future. Yeah. So speaking of good examples of Linux, because I think Linux is a very good, same as Bitcoin, it's a very good example of technology that seemed crazy at the start and was fighting the empire, basically. Basically, like the financial empire for Bitcoin and the Windows empire for Linux, right? And over the decades, it just got better and better. And I think that we are at the point now with the rest of the internet, not just the financial internet, which Bitcoin is taking care of, but I mean the rest of the internet, which Ethereum was the promise, but the prince that was promised but never delivered. And, you have things like in France, you have a 16-year experiment of Linux used by the gendarmerie. And I think they saved, I don't know how many, 2 million euros just in licensing fees. And then well, it's
a hell of a head start. People don't realize what companies pay big tech firms just to run their software. Yeah.
Exactly. Just go on a website and look at enterprise and look at price per seat and see how much you have to pay for one of these.
It's a strange aside, but just as a taxpayer, people should be pissed off about this. Like, it's just a tax on your whole government that they're paying X per seat for licensing all this stuff, which there are equivalents to, and you're paying a non-trivial portion of your taxes just to that.
Yes, and it's also the fact that, maybe I'm changing topic here, but if anybody remembers net neutrality, how that was supposed to work, and how slowly just kind of disappeared, and now we're like having all these different networks that together is called the internet, but it's no longer the internet. And on top of that, you have all these OSs that somebody else's owns, and then you have all your data that somebody else owns. Well, so
the extreme example when you buy a book on a Kindle and you still don't own it. Like,
exactly,
you get pulled off. Yeah.
So it's very important to understand that the stack is not just your app, your OS. It's also the network. And there are things that people trying to do on the app level and on the OS level that you can literally stop on the network level if the network is smart enough, if the network is thought out properly with the user in mind. And right now, there's nobody sitting at that table from our side.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's super interesting because like if you look at the Linux example and you look at the difference, you know, the Linux, even once it started to get competitive on the server, it wasn't like way miles better than Unixes and things that existed before for this like really small set of like I want to run like web servers and administer them at a text command line. The big difference was that license that meant that no matter what happened and who developed on it, you had to contribute stuff back into the center. You could do what you like with it, but you can't then go and sell that or do something with that without pushing your code back in. It was that little thing that made all the difference because it protected that core and it meant that it grew organically in this useful way. And there wasn't really a lot of point in forking off and running off. So you've got this insane piece of software where like these hugely competitive companies that compete with each other still contribute back to the center, right? So like companies as different as like Tencent, Alibaba, and ByteDance, which are all massive competitors in their own market, but then also kind of diametrically opposed to Google, Microsoft. All of those companies contribute to the Linux kernel because they know it just pushes them forward, right? And I think what you see there is like kind of like a scientific approach where you say, well, like obviously science improves if we share our science. If we all do our science by ourselves, we make almost no progress. And people grok it and they understand it. And we have almost none of the ability to do that in the app world or in the network layer, right? So we just have to take what we get. We have no ability generally to change the economics. So, and the big example is you can see that it takes a long time for a developer who starts sort of working as a core dev on Cyto, or for people who are interested in building on Cyto, like surprisingly long time in terms of not months really, but just like as a part of what they're working out, what they're trying to do is that the rules of the game are totally different. When you start doing stuff peer to peer on an open network with open protocols, there's just all these assumptions like, well, I have to have some big corporate entity in the center that has all these servers, right? I have to work that way. And no, you don't, right? It's like if you could just throw away your mobile phones and start using walkie-talkies with your friends without all of the hassles of that not really working, because how do you like coordinate who's on what channel and who's got what name and stuff, right? It's like you could just pick up phones and start using them that way, and everything was handled at that level, like, you know, assigning numbers and all of that stuff just was not an issue. And it means you can do all sorts of creative things with commerce, with sharing, also with social, you know, like breaking these models we have that social is a bunch of client users and a great data repository that's sucking all the content in and then handing it back out for profit, right? That doesn't have to be that way. The social is social. It's however we want to interact. And it's a really big leap that I think people aren't necessarily making because they're not seeing it as, yeah, it's as different from, you know, the old software thought of, well, who's going to build the OS if there's no company doing it because it's expensive and difficult. You know, it has to be a corporate thing, and then you have to sell it for money, you know, and block people from using it and so on and so forth. You can't possibly make it free to use. And Linux showed, no, that's just not true. And I think it's similar with the kind of revolution you get when you put something like Cyto in front of people. It takes a while to see, but it's like, no, we're not trying to build Twitter. We might be trying to build something that performs that role and more in people's lives, you know, that fills the urges they have with that. But we're trying to build it so that it's fundamentally better, right? It's more about genuinely being social and communicating. And so we don't have a central authority, and therefore we don't have the urge to create a feed, right? What we have is the urge on users' part to find and associate with people they find interesting, right? And that's fundamentally different, right? That changes the whole game in terms of like what's possible and what the limitations are.
Exactly. And I think, you know, the easiest way to validate your point would be to ask people to look back a few years on their Facebook feed and
Mm.
tell me how many of your friends are still in your feed. How, compared to ads or videos or
Mm.
viral stuff, the ratio of friends to what the feed thinks you're interested in, it just becomes wider and wider.
Mm.
And it's kind of like the same idea of the man in the middle. What these companies are trying to do is to find something that you enjoy and then slowly intersect themselves with that process
Mm.
and then kind of separate you from it and then sell you the solution. So for example, you have this epidemic of loneliness. The epidemic of
Mm.
loneliness is because of the algorithms, which are so dopamine addictive that people don't call each other anymore. They just sit in the feed. And
Mm.
now Meta has a new idea to give you 11 AI friends. So the same problem that they caused, now they're
Yeah.
trying to solve. So you kind of have to
Yeah.
understand that
Well,
if the government is not helping you and if the companies won't help you, you kind of
yeah.
have to help yourself.
Right. Well, I think there's also this it's an interesting sort of thought process there with like presuming people need or want a certain amount of dopamine, right? Like if you don't have social media as it's constructed, well, you go and find it by dealing with other people, right? You get it by going to the pub and trying to tell a funny joke, and then someone laughs at it, and you feel good, right? Like you get your dopamine that way. Is that massively superior? Well, I'm not just like morally superior, but the outcomes are better, right? From just sitting on your feet. But what's more important is that the blokes down the pub that you told the joke to don't have some weird financial interest in like how they manipulate this experience to make more money out of you. Right? I mean, maybe one guy's an alcoholic and he laughs at your jokes, so you stick around and he can have another beer. But that's not the that's not the most conniving plot I've ever heard of. And it's fundamental. That's the fundamental difference. You've got a very human interaction versus something that is ripe for commercialization and automated improvement in quotes, and therefore it's going to clunk and whir into it, into those kind of negative spirals because that's just how it's set up. And the way to get away from that kind of thing is, to look at stuff seriously like socials and say, well, no, it should be a digital equivalent of, yes, socializing. Right? So if you do stuff peer to peer, what you find out is, to your point earlier, you don't have the central server that's able to immediately hand everything that your friends have sent in back to you. But it doesn't. Guess what? It doesn't do that anyway now, right? You don't necessarily get stuff in the chronological order that was created because if you're doing it as a social mesh, then I might get something cool from a friend of yours' friend's mum, but it'll come down that channel to me, right? So it won't be as universal, but it's genuine and it's a personal connection, right? So that smoothness, that wonderful thing, you open the app and everything's there and it's all chronologically ordered. So that's very cleverly done. Like building Red Square, we had so many people tell us that there were problems with the feed, and it was a design choice we'd made because we thought it was superior usability, but people were so used to what the way social apps had become that they would say, oh, it's a bug. And you'd ask them, why is it a bug? I mean, the classic one was the likes thing where we just said you can like as many times as you want to press the button. Like, we're not gatekeeping liking. And so people started doing that. Oh, it's a fault. I did it. I liked something 3 times. It's like, no, the only reason that that's like limited in systems is because the companies that run these systems realize they can monetize the like, right? So they can own them, and then they can use like flow to like manipulate people. So they limit it. But in an open system, why would you limit it, right? You just like someone can press that button as often as they want. Nobody's better or worse off for it, other than the people clicking. So and it gets so ingrained. Oh, this is the way it is, that people start seeing other things as a bug, and that to me is evidence of like the skill with which it's done, but also the deliberate nature with which it's done. Right?
Exactly, and you have to understand that there are entire departments at
Mm,
Google, at Meta, uh, at TikTok, whose only task is to find out how they can extract the most time out of you,
mm,
how they can get you hooked. These, I recommend everybody to watch The Social Dilemma,
mm,
um, and to understand that when you go on something like Red Square, you see a social media app that is not built to monetize you.
mm.
And all of a sudden, it's not filled with clickbait stuff. You're free to look at stuff however you want. Nobody's asking you
You're
for
free to build
your.
your own client if you want to that does whatever you like to the content. No one's going to stop you because it's just going past on the chain. So you can do whatever you like with that content.
Exactly, and it's not from the colors to the buttons to the way likes work. For
Mm,
example, it's not made to keep you there and just squeeze everything out of you. It's
mm,
meant to help you socialize and then you know take care of your life. Go be
mm,
with your friends, do something else, and it's very strange to even for me personally to see how I don't really realize the fact that I've been so trained by these platforms like
mm,
Instagram and Facebook and TikTok to think in a certain way, to behave in a certain way. It's only by separating myself and seeing a counterexample that I can realize, oh my God, that place is it's a show of horrors. It's like a
mm.
Tivoli of horrors.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, I was shocked. I wrote a little piece today on having discovered, and it's probably something we should talk about once we've kind of looked into a bit more, about the growing involvement of private equity in owning YouTube channels, which I didn't realize like this is a growing thing. And there was a throwaway line in one of the videos I was watching about it where they're like, and there's this company who have like, their followers are too, right? They're like their channel of content that people put in front of their kids to keep them quiet at a restaurant or whatever. And the guy was describing what they're doing, and he says, I know that sounds evil, and you might think I'm making this up, but they patented it. And they've patented this method for measuring children's activity to predict when they'll look away so that they can design content from which tiny babies will never look away, right? Because like they realize that as soon as the kid at the restaurant who's been pacified with the YouTube channel looks away and gets distracted, they'll start engaging, and then the parents are back with the kid, and the YouTube's off now. So, or they'll go somewhere else to something that will keep the kid. And I was just thinking, that's just so like, this is, they patented methods for like trying to like, keep children on this like kind of tiny path of constant attention through whatever they do. And that's what they use to design the content, not anything to do with like edifying children or helping them in it. It's purely like, can we keep the view times up? And it is a bit of a show of horrors when you start thinking about it like that. Like it's designed, it's like designing car crashes you can't look away from or something just because that's what gets the most views, right? So,
Yeah, and I don't know. It just a counterexample of what you're talking about is this YouTube channel called Mr. Who's the Boss,
mm,
who reviews tech.
yeah.
And I know that everything he does is edited. It's called retention based editing.
Mm,
And I think it's like a cut every other second.
mm-hmm,
And there's like hooks on hooks on hooks on hooks. There's always something happening next. There's always something that gets revealed.
mm,
And it kind of like strings you along for 20 minutes. But at the end of that whole thing, you don't really remember much
mm,
because it never really goes into depth into anything. So you end up in a situation where you're using all this apps, you're consuming all this
yeah.
content, but at the end of the day, the only thing that you're left with is confusion, no capacity to think for yourself, and the whole day is gone. And I don't think that Sato advocates that type of world. And we would like people to be a bit more conscious about how they use
You
tech.
can't, like you can't, and we would never want to like tell people or force like what kind of content is going to be on anything. Like the whole point is you can build tools for yourself and others that they want to use, and you could do with those what you want. The important thing is that you get the fundamentals right, so that because these things are peer to peer and because these things are paying for the infrastructure through use and not through some circuitous monetization path, that you've done everything you can to let there be a level playing field and for people who are producing quality stuff, right? To do that, to do well. There'll always be the case that there's two bands on in the same small town, and the cheesy one might get more, people there than the guys who really, work hard and put on, interesting and original shows. So it's not about like forcing people to have particular taste or those sorts of things. It's about avoiding creating an ecosystem where there's only so many players, and then access to the channels becomes a kind of license to do certain things and a guarantee of a certain amount of incoming input. And so you can then start running these kinds of, manipulative scams. It's not, or even just businesses that like leverage the weaknesses in people, right? It's not ever going to get rid of the, the human aspect of what's being played on and the desire for dopamine or whatever. It's just going to try to make going to the pub and telling jokes with your friends a viable alternative to staring at your phone screen all night, right? And make sure that those two things are possible, right? And in fact that they can compete with each other rather than having this sort of privileged world for these tools that in the end end up, basically monetizing the user and little else. So.
Yes, but the thing is that at least on Sado you can kind of make your own algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
So you can optimize for the sort of content that gives you depth or that you consider to be relevant, right? You have that granular control.
Mm-hmm.
On YouTube, they control the algorithm and they always maximize for watch time. So these channels that employ this sort of like retention-based editing, or they patent all these methods of keeping you engaged, they will get a huge organic push on YouTube because the algorithm sells ads. So they want people that watch throughout. So it's fundamentally, it's productive to their own business to push that sort of content. And everything that doesn't fit that format just gets thrown away. Can you imagine finding Herzog's Fitzcarraldo on YouTube? It will get buried in the algorithm in like 2 seconds. You'll never see it. It get 2 views. But on Red Square, you can make
then the algorithm gets very confused about what to give you next. It's like, what on earth do you want? What do you want? But
yes, but I mean that's the beauty of Red Square, where you can decide yourself what sort of algorithm you want to have and create your own.
The way to think about it is like you could deploy your own algorithm, but to do that, you'd need to get a large amount of incoming stuff that you've somehow gotten your hands on. So you could read the whole chain going past, take everybody's Red Square messages and just like sort them yourself. You could do that with friends if you want, right? But that's not the default way everybody uses it. You can't force that on anybody else, right? And also, that's going to be quite expensive. If you just come along, your very first option is, oh, who's this Alex guy? He posted a great cat picture. I like that. Follow him because he's probably good for more cat pictures. That's the algorithm there, right? That's as complicated as it gets. And then I realized, he's into, I don't know whatever it is, hurling. He loves his good Irish sports. So I bump into some people who like more of that, and we become friends, etc. That's the algorithm working. If Alex stops posting cat pictures and only posts Irish sport and I'm not interested in it, well, at some point I start ignoring Alex or I drop him from my feed, right? But it's my choice. There's no thing for that. Fred or whatever, Alex in disguise, could start making super clickbaity videos, and maybe I watch them and maybe I don't. But why would I hand them on to my friends? In fact, I risk being defriended by people who don't want that stuff coming through me to them. That's the algorithm. But the point is, these are our own choices we're making, etc. Right? And of course, people won't take all that time and stuff. Maybe I'll use a particular Red Square app that my friend recommends because it makes it easier to use Red Square in the way I want to use it. It pulls in more, it pulls in less, whatever it is. That's my choice because somebody else might recommend another one. In the same way that you go from using one email client to another email client, right? It doesn't, or one SMS app to another. It doesn't bother you, right? Because you're still getting the same messages. It's just I like the layout better, right? That's the way you want things to be. So it's not like you should never have an algorithm, or you should or shouldn't do things a particular way, or that people will stop making silly videos. The point is, like, you can then choose your way of interacting with them, and there isn't an advantage granted to the people who do the very worst job of showing you the worst stuff. It's up for grabs, and if your friends all love Werner Herzog, well, heaven help you, but you're going to end up seeing it, right? Because that's what's around. If you don't like that, you probably want to find some other friends.
But exactly, it means that you get to choose your own adventure in a way, right? Instead of
Yeah.
having this middleman that kind of pushes things on you because it knows automatically that these are very, very attractive dopamine
Well,
filled
it's
videos
also
and they can place ads.
it's also just it's not just that, right? The folks at YouTube, for various reasons, including just the simple economics of running servers, would prefer 80 popular channels over 120 popular channels. Right? They would, because less work to administer, less work for them to handle, etc. So they would prefer to be dealing with smaller numbers. So the way the funding model and the reward system goes is it works towards funneling people into fewer and fewer groups. So there's a competition there that's only going to, that rewards the most aggressively predatory content making ahead of other stuff. So it's not even just a little matter of like, oh well, people just happen to like Marcus Brownlee and his very, very catchy Xiaomi review that I can't remember. It's not just that people like that. I mean, he's an engaging, charming fellow. He could make videos that people like. That's fine. The question is doing that excluding people? And that's the point with the centralized algorithm, the centralized model. Some guy with a lisp and a bad jacket in a basement giving you exactly the information you would want to know about that phone isn't getting pushed to the top of the list because they don't want that. They don't want a mix of things. It's like he's getting views, he's engaging with people, building an audience, then let's funnel people toward that. So let's recommend that. Let's push this other stuff to the side. And that's really the issue, is that it's the structure of that economy, essentially, and the economics of that business that make the difference. And when you can pick apart the interrelationships, so you can't use one to fund the other or one to punish the other, then you can make your content. You can, Marcus Brownlee can make his reviews and people might like them, and he might be the most popular guy out of all of the reviewers. But you don't have the system where everyone therefore is being pushed towards that harder than anybody else, and that it's very hard for anyone else to come up into that space. And that's the big difference, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's that, but it's also the fact that it kind of creates behavior, because when you push something over everything else, that thing becomes the model, and then people try to imitate that because they see, oh, that's what works,
Well,
and then
that's
all
what
of a
people
sudden
expect.
you get all these channels that all sound the same, they all function the same, and you get, instead of having a multitude of ideas and seeing different things coming up, you just see the same thing and just different people just doing the same thing, which is, I don't know, suboptimal, and it's not really how life should be.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as well because you see that kind of thing with, like, I mean, there's sort of, for those of us who grew up in non-massive markets, so not Chinese or American, basically, you had this thing where your media, almost everybody had this kind of two-tier media life where there's like the polished American stuff and then the grainy kind of hokey local stuff, right? And it was just impossible for local channels in Australia with their tiny audiences couldn't make high quality sci-fi or anything. So almost every good TV show was a comedy or like a local drama or something, and they put all their effort into the writing and the acting, right? And it was pretty low budget and stuff. But you get this kind of you got this split, and what you could see is like the American stuff was always more popular. It's just flashier, and they've got spaceships and stuff, right? Like people just go there, and what you get with these big platforms is just a single space where everybody migrates in that one way, and actually, what you do is lose out on a lot of really good of the stuff that you had in those local channels, where there'd be like everyone you talk to, there was like their one thing, their hometown comedy show or whatever, which was like just amazing. Partially because it was local and partially because it was really that good. But it wouldn't get made if you're allowed to flood local TV with like nothing but American, primetime shows, because they were clearly better produced than made. And it's kind of, to me, it's like that. But you've just sort of taken away all of these weird geographic and constraints, right? And you've just given everything to like one channel and said you do what you want with that. And that's basically what we see in the social and short video space. Streaming has its whole other problems, but that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, and it kind of like brings back this idea that if you see nation states trying to take back their sovereignty, trying to use an operating system that it's no longer Mac, it's no longer Windows, that should tell you that maybe on a personal level, it's something that you should also be looking at. Because if those people who are in charge see this as a problem for the country, maybe it trickles down to the individual level, and it might be something to think about.
Well, and the other way to look at it, I mean, another aspect to that kind of, I think, argues what you're saying really strongly is, if you look at what Germany have done recently with just mandating that you have to use open document formats. So like the ISO and the German industry standards, which basically the European ones have had for ages, like Word documents, that it's just a format that any form of software can work out and read. And that's been around for ages. Parts of Europe just moved to saying you have to use those, which Microsoft Word can read and write. You can't use a .doc or whatever, which only Word can do. Microsoft has lobbied so hard against that. And yet, no one in that process is saying, don't use Microsoft, right? Now, Microsoft know that this is step one to them being able to move off Microsoft equipment, because one of the problems with moving away to a Linux-based OS or whatever is that you've got this backlog of everything's doc. And actually now other things can read docs. But it's not always perfect conversion and so forth. So people don't want to change this for that reason. So step one is, once we've got 5 years of everything in open format, then there's no reason to stick. And in fact, a lot of people may not even realize if you swap them out onto an open platform or a different piece of software. So I think the proof there is like it just proves what you're saying. For Microsoft to lobby as hard as they have against a document format, like that tells you most of what you need to know about what's at stake there for them, because it's all about that control and having that ability to use things like lock-in, etc., to keep people in place. I think the last straw, and on the camel for that one, was then also the fact that it's all gone online now, and so they're like the servers, no matter what rules they put in place, it turns out that Spanish government documents ended up in Vermont or US East Coast Amazon center somewhere, because that's where Microsoft will put them in their own. But yes, in some cloud server outside of Europe, and they were that's been their the last straw. But even before that, they've known like you just don't have control of your own destiny if you can't determine what the document, what software people can use, because you're already stuck on somebody else's platform.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of. We might sound a bit like we're nagging or just trying to be like, "Hey, you guys," but there's maybe, I think there's a differentiation here because we're not just nagging, we're also pointing you towards the solution.
Yeah.
And it's not because the solution is Sado, but because it works. And it's much easier to make an argument where you can point people at, look, this is something else. It works. It gives you agency.
And this is the big point about the designer side of what we're talking about here is like, we're not saying come and use our apps and pay us money. Right? We're saying come and use this network, build your own apps, copy ours, do whatever you like. Right? It's not the whole point is this is about making a stand and helping each other create a space where there is an alternative. And it takes a lot to make it as vibrant and as interesting as YouTube and all those things. It's tough. But here's a way forward that isn't, just the straight acceptance that there is no other way forward, right? I don't have an alternative to like what chat can I use, what there are people I'll support in the space like Signal, Proton Mail. There are people doing a great job in their space, in their vertical, making things as good as they can and fighting as hard as they can against kind of these intensifying forces and also these sort of regulatory forces that are causing problems. But in our little sphere, what we're doing is trying to create the infrastructure in the space for people to break free and give them the tools they need to cheaply and easily build stuff that pushes back against this trend. And so that's why we're kind of get up in the morning and work on this stuff, is because we kind of really care about it. I mean, I will also say in that if you're in California right now, hit up your local authorities about 1043, CA 1043, the new rule coming through there about age verification, because it's messing with my Linux distro. So please help me with that. Please help yourself with that. I'm not saying this is the using Sado is the only thing. I'm saying be aware of this stuff. We're working on this part. There's a lot of benefit to pushing back, and there's a way forward where we can really make a difference, I think, and that's why I feel like now is also the time to really push this word out about what we're doing, because the trends that we kind of built Sado in the face of have just gotten stronger and stronger. Like they really feel like they're coming to a head right now. So to me, it feels like like people can use this more than ever.
It's definitely true. I think that it's going to be a very, very rude awakening. But fortunately, we are not alone, and unlike the Chinese who just got blindsided, we have Sado on our side. So
Sado does work there too, but it works anywhere. But
well, there was no Sado when the Chinese built their internet, right? So people had no choice; they went straight into the apps.
Yeah, well, and also the network there has been built so. I mean, it's gone so hard and fast. It just, like you say, it blindsided everyone. It skipped right over the actual internet part to this completely app-driven dystopia, which is also a kind of pleasure dome, right? It's very Aldous Huxley. Certainly convenient. People love it.
I think we should close today's show on a positive note and end with the raffle.
Yeah.
So if you wanna leave a comment on the at the end of the show, please do that now. I'm gonna pull the comments right now, and let's see how many people are. What? Post has been deleted? No, it hasn't been deleted. Let's try this again. Okay, let's see this. Okay, let's try it now. All right, so we got 38 people, and now we're gonna choose a random winner. Let's see who ends up being the winner.
I should hum that Price is Right music.
Oh wait, no, because I'm using a free version, so it won't let me do it twice. I did it once before the show to test it, and now let's see if I can do it here. Man, this is crazy. I think you know what we're gonna do, Richard. I'm gonna close my eyes and just choose someone at random. You see, this is why we need a new internet. Everybody's trying to like nickel and dime you. You can't click anything on Google. It's like, well, you kind of have to pay. You want to use this thing one time? Give us $20. You know, give us a monthly subscription for you to use it one time.
That is
Okay, so
that is
let's.
actually the other. There's a whole bunch of stuff around that with like not needing to give away credit card details just to do something
Yeah,
once.
I'm closing my eyes now, and I'm gonna pick someone. Okay, from Manila, Philippines,
All
Ed
right,
Soliman. Ed
excellent.
Soliman, please get in touch with us. Send us a message, and we will get in touch with you and send you 100,000 Sato tokens. You are the winner. I'm writing it down as a
Hooray!
message just to please get in touch.
Excellent.
So there we go. We have a hopefully a happy citizen.
Well, the other thing is, of course, I'm like predisposed to wanting everybody to be in Asia because the time zone's better for me in Alex life
Yeah,
to get
yeah.
up at 5 a.m. No, it's this is actually a good time for Asia. It's
Yeah, I
still
think
late
because
evening.
I had a look at it and it's like 8 p.m. So 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. in
Prime
Manila.
time.
It's doable. It's prime
Yeah.
time, exactly. Sato is prime time. Sato X Live prime time in
It's like
Manila.
the classic line in the China tech industry, which is that it's always yesterday in California.
Oh, oh man,
It's
that's
nice.
harsh. That's
Yeah,
shots fired.
it's also true in so many ways.
All right. Well, thank you so much for another wonderful show, Richard, and thank you to everybody who's been watching us and
Yeah.
leaving comments and everything. I guess we'll see everybody once again at next week Thursday, 12 p.m. UTC, 8 p.m. Manila prime time.
Yes.
Have a good one. Catch you next time.
They're